This man created the 5-day work week. This man created the education system to be structured the way that it is. And this man created what ended up being the largest global infrastructure of energy in the history of mankind. Okay? This is downtown New York in 1907. Okay? And it's cool to look at this. 50% of these cars, 50% are run on steam. Guys, 50% of cars in 1907 were run on steam, just like locomotives, okay? And, the Stanley group here, like this was their big car. They actually had this, they were the most popular. They had the fastest land speed record at the time, which was 127 miles an hour. But the most exciting thing, which was the future of transportation that everyone knew for certain, which was electric vehicles. The entire fleet of taxi cabs at the end of the 1800s was electric vehicles. Here they are, plugged in, like we would plug in today. This is Thomas Edison in front of his first ever electric vehicle that he built and brought to market. Okay, so he had an AC motor. And it turns out Thomas Edison was a total asshole. And Nikola Tesla couldn't work with him, so he bounced. And after he bounced, he created the AC induction motor. The thing is this was the AC and DC battle was the sort of like, it was the first version of the Apple PC. It was the first version of the Beta versus VHS. What is going to be the thing? And this got so enraged that everyone was trying to figure out what is the technology that we're going to go to, right? And AC or DC became the biggest talk of the town. But quietly, 40-year-old Henry Ford started Ford Motor Company. He had two investors, one of which owned a coal company. But what he noticed was that gasoline was very affordable. Okay, no one used gasoline. We made kerosene out of it. It was kind of natural gas we would burn off, and we would just throw away gasoline. It was extremely scalable, and it was inevitable that this was the easiest thing to scale. Okay, and so he made a radical bet on gasoline as the energy source for cars. Okay, in 1907, steam was the incumbent. It was very well understood. Electric cars were the future. They were the status symbol, okay? And gasoline was dirty. It was inefficient. It wouldn't start in cold weather. And it lacked infrastructure. Like all of them, it lacked infrastructure, okay? But what Henry Ford saw, okay, was an abundance that everyone else was ignoring. It was cheap. It was scalable. And it was full of untapped potential. This was the everyman car, okay? Not the cars of kings and queens. The first service station came out in 1907. In 1908, Henry Ford released the Model T. And by 1925, the Model T was so mass-produced, it killed both electric and steam cars in one fell swoop. This became the dominant technology because Henry Ford bet on an energy source that everyone else was ignoring, that was hiding in plain sight, okay? Henry Ford made decisions in his late 20s, okay? He worked for Westinghouse. He worked for Edison for a bit as well. And it was along the way that he thought that steam engines made no sense for lightweight vehicles because the boiler was just too dangerous, is what he said. And he looked at electric and he said, well, first of all, there's no batteries that are light enough. Like they weigh like a refrigerator. It doesn't make any sense. And to build the infrastructure for the trolleys or whatever, to do the cords for the trolleys, that infrastructure was way too expensive for what he saw. Imagine driving around today, okay, with those trolley rails everywhere. Like it just wasn't going to work. So he made the decision to focus on gasoline when no one else was, okay? But the big innovation, okay, that Henry Ford made, it was not in gasoline. It was not in, the industrial structure that transformed schools and how we work and everything else, but it was actually the energy infrastructure that had so much tailwind behind it that it was unstoppable and eventually inevitable. Energy infrastructure changes much slower than energy. This is what I call the Rockefeller effect, okay? Look, John Rockefeller became the first billionaire ever in history, okay? But here's the thing, look at this man. Does he look like he speculates? This dude is very calculated, okay? He builds infrastructure. He built pipelines, refineries, and rail networks. He built the entire foundation of 20th century energy based on the scalable model that Henry Ford chose and was successful with the Model T, okay? Oil's dominance was locked in for generations. And I don't care if, green energy is where we need to end up. It's just not where we are today, right? And so it's interesting to think that our brains think faster and adopt faster than our infrastructure, okay? iPhone replaced the BlackBerry in 5 years, okay? Who remembers the BlackBerry, right? So, Netflix crushed Blockbuster in under a decade. We've got, coal to oil took 50 plus years. Coal to natural gas took 40 years and still not complete. Natural gas is the cleanest, by the way. Then you've got nuclear energy, which actually is the best. But, how do we not have another Chernobyl? 70 years, and it's still the future of what we're working on. Renewables, despite trillions in investment, are only about 12% of global energy after 20 years of effort and desire. Leveraging the opportunities in the infrastructure that is so abundant and so quiet, that's where fortunes can be made, okay? 100 years later, oil and gas is still over 80% of the world's energy. Right here, this was the inflection point in 1910. This yellow line is steam cars. They were 80%, okay? They were 80%. What year is that? 1890, okay? That's what was driving around on the streets, okay? And then you had, the sort of, Tesla, I was going to say, the EVs, down here, but merging, coming up. And, you've got to think that this line is too simplified, but, this should be a little more exponential. But the point is 1910, gasoline hit the inflection point and went up for the rest of the decade as everyone adopted it and everyone built the tailwind behind our energy infrastructure that exists now. We're trying to replace it, I get it, but everything you hear is about green energy. 83%, this is 2020, I think, 2022, okay? 83% is still carbon. You've got coal, natural gas, and oil, 83%, 17% non-carbon. So just think, Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. Okay, you've got some green in there and it's growing, but you can't get rid of this infrastructure. This is where we are, okay? So you've got, again, the red line is oil and gas and the green line is renewables, and this is today, and that's the gap. That's the gap. All because this young man made a decision about what to focus on.